What do you do on Sundays?
We talk about Cate Blanchett, the acting, the costumes, the awards, but mostly the Blanchett of it all.
I'm not acting.
You think this is a love affair?
I saw you, Erica. Meeting in the middle.
This is Sundays with Cate, and I'm your host, Murtada Elfadl. Welcome to Sundays with Cate, the podcast series about the films of Cate Blanchett. Every week, we choose a Cate Blanchett film and discuss it. And this week, we're going for one of the big ones. There are kind of 6 of them, but I think she appears in maybe 3 at the most. So, of course, we're talking about Lord of the Rings. The Fellowship of the Ring is the movie we'll most talk about, but there, of course, that one had 2 sequels, and then a few years later, there were The Hobbits, which was a series of 3 movies. In all of these movies, she is credited as Galadriel, and it is one of her most iconic parts. As I have talked to many guests on this show, a lot of them, when I ask, when did you first notice Cate, they mention Galadriel and Lord of the Rings as their first introduction, even though it came a few years into her career. Other people like me were introduced and fell in love with Elizabeth, but for a lot of people, it was Galadriel. And for this conversation, I am very excited to welcome to the podcast filmmaker and the co-showrunner of the web series Wormholes. Please welcome Conrado Falco. Hello, Conrado.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I'm really excited to talk about Cate today with you.
I'm excited to have you on the show. And when we were discussing you coming on the show, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about Lord of the Rings, which frankly, and I will admit to my listeners and to you, it was one of the movies that I was apprehensive about discussing. One, because there's so many of them and there are lots of hours to watch, and Cate is not in a lot of the hours that you have to watch. And 2, because I'm a casual fan of Lord of the Rings. I've watched the first 3 when they came out. Every Christmas, 2001, 2002, 2003, dutifully went to the cinema, watched it, sat for the 17 hours that it took to see those movies, and I never thought of them again, except, when I see memes or GIFs of Cate as Galadriel. So tell me, Conrado, why do you want to talk about Lord of the Rings?
Oh, wow. A couple of reasons, actually. I still love those movies, but I especially loved those movies when they came out. And I was pretty young back then, kind of middle school aged. So I was falling in love with movies, really starting to think about them. And it was the perfect, storm with those 3 huge Christmas releases that were just fantastic and spectacular.
Yeah, they are a phenomenon, and they were very successful. And I don't think there is anybody even who casually watches movies who hasn't seen The Lord of the Rings, because also they played on TV, at least here in the US, a lot, and they are available everywhere. Unlike with some other movies of Cate's early career, it's very hard to find them, but these ones, no, they're available everywhere. And if you're listening to us from the US, they're currently on HBO Max, so you can go watch them right now, or just fast forward to Cate's scenes, which you can also find on YouTube.
Yes. That was my original idea when I mentioned this to you, and I said, okay, let's do Lord of the Rings. I was like, maybe I'll just watch her scenes because she's not in that much of it. But then I put it on, and I was totally immersed, and I got into it, and my wife hadn't seen the movies, and she was with me, so we just watched them, and we just watched the first movie, and then we were like, maybe we should watch the next one. Okay, let's watch the next one, and then over 3 nights we watched the whole trilogy again, which was great for me, and now I feel super prepared to talk about Lord of the Rings.
I have to admit, I watched the first one, and then I watched bits of the 2 others, and then I saw some other scenes from The Hobbit, which I've never seen The Hobbit. So apologies for The Hobbit fans. If you're listening, I am sorry. I haven't watched those despite my abiding love and admiration for Cate Blanchett. Lord of the Rings are based on the books by J.R.R. Tolkien, and we're talking mainly about The Fellowship of the Ring, which is the first movie. It came out in 2001. It obviously was one of the biggest successes, one of those billion-dollar movies, which means everybody has seen it. It had a major impact on the culture. Critically, it was very well received. In fact, if you go and read old reviews, basically almost everyone called it the best adventure film of all time, or in the vein of that. There was a lot of hyperbole about how good it is. And there actually are very good. Like, when I went and watched The Fellowship of the Ring, especially after being inundated for years with superhero movies, which I watched about 10% of them. I did watch Thor Ragnarok, obviously, for reasons. But I watched Black Panther, but it's not like I watched every superhero movie. I've watched enough of superhero movies to be like, wow, these are really well made. It's a really well made adventure movie where it sings, like the camera is where it's supposed to be. The action scenes are exciting. The acting is good. Everything looks good. And I think that's why they're very popular. So, Conrado, can you tell it, what is The Fellowship of the Ring about?
So, The Fellowship of the Ring is the first movie, like you said, and it's basically, the whole trilogy really is the story of this guy, Frodo, who is a hobbit, who are these kind of like little creatures, kind of, I don't even know how to describe them, like dwarf-like, but there's also dwarves in the movie, so let's not get too confused. They're hobbits. We all know what a hobbit is. We all know this movie. We've heard of the word hobbit a million times at this point. We know what a hobbit is. So Frodo's a hobbit. He is given this ring, which is a magical evil ring that was worn by the evil kind of Emperor Sauron. And now Sauron is trying to come back, and he wants to get the ring. So Frodo is tasked with taking this ring to basically the volcano where the ring was produced, which is Mount Doom, and destroying the ring. And so in the process, he encounters a bunch of different allies and enemies. There's wizards and elves and more hobbits, and they fight these monsters, and it's a big epic adventure, basically.
Yeah. And it's a wonderful epic adventure. And as a fan of Cate, I was very happy that she introduces the movie. We hear her voice first.
The very first thing.
Yes, absolutely. So she starts it all, and then she appears in all of her ethereal beauty as Galadriel, almost immediately. So you don't have to wait for her, which I thought I would have to wait for her, but I didn't, which was a wonderful surprise, even though I have seen this movie before, but a while ago. And then she narrates the prologue, which she explains this myth about the creation of the One Ring that has all this power.
It began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest, and fairest of all beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men, who above all else desire power. For within these rings was bound the strength and will to govern each race. One ring to rule them all.
From then we go on into Frodo and Bilbo Baggins, and we meet all the characters. So this is, if you look at the cast, like, it's not just Cate. This is like a who's who of people maybe in 2001 we didn't know, like Orlando Bloom, who now we know, or some people who were a little well-known, not as well-known, like Viggo Mortensen, who people knew of, but definitely after he played Aragon, he became a major star with that. And I think it's, Cate, when she made this movie in 2001, this was 3 years after Elizabeth, which shot her to international fame and earned her an Oscar nomination. But still, I think for the casual moviegoer, because all the movies that she made after Elizabeth was a hit, but all the other movies she made after Elizabeth were little seen, with the exception of The Talented Mr. Ripley, which was a blockbuster, $100 million movie at the time. So that movie was seen, but otherwise, it was all these little movies that nobody has seen at the time. So I think, back to my point earlier, this was probably the movie that introduced her to so many people. And also, I think part of why Galadriel became iconic is the look. So we have to talk about the look. So she has the pointed ear, she has the very blonde hair and the sort of white robes. In her big scene, she is very serene as she's walking down these steps. And then later on, she's gliding down. It's a very sort of iconic look of everything. And there's a halo around her. So even though she's not in a lot of the movie, you it's a very memorable visual, which is why I think this role resonated with people and why it's still one of her more iconic roles.
Mm-hmm. Totally, I agree 100%. I mean, the look definitely helps, and the fact that she's just lit, like you say, with a halo, and she like produces her own radiance almost, is definitely makes her iconic. But I do think, since this is a Cate Blanchett podcast, that she brings something extra to that, you know, like because I feel like she brings an attitude of herself of like almost like, look how incredible I am. I'm like, you know, that I feel like Cate Blanchett's really good at doing that, at bringing a lot of attitude to the roles when they call for it. And I can imagine a Galadriel that it's kind of like very serious and serene and still, but there's something in the way that she kind of looks at Frodo and at the other characters with kind of like a bit of a winking thing to it, that I think brings it to another level of, who is this woman and what's her deal, you know? Like, I think about her a lot while watching the movie, even though she's not in a lot of it.
As a scholar of Blanchett, I think she is somebody who sort of knows how to have an impact based on how she puts herself in the frame. And, you know, some actors are just instinctive and it's all about their talent, and some actors know when they don't need to do much and it can be all about the pose. And there are, in some of her performances, she goes deep, like Blue Jasmine, where it's all about the character and the acting. And in others, like I think here as Galadriel, it's more about the pose. It's more about how you are in the frame, how your body moves and how your costumes look. And she kind of knows how to just push it a little bit further to make whatever it is that the cinematographer is giving her, the director is giving her, the costume designer is giving her, to just give it a little bit more with the way she puts herself in the frame. Because if you look at Lord of the Rings, there are other actresses who were in these movies. They're not as memorable as Cate Blanchett. I don't think there is any other actress in those movies that you remember, or you remember her look. And it's partly the part. Galadriel is an iconic part, but it's partly, like you said, Cate herself. Yes,
totally. The attitude, because their parts are very serious and they play them very serious and very earnest, which is really good for what they're doing. But Cate Blanchett, and with this part, she just brings a little bit of playfulness that you don't see a lot in these other warrior types in this movie.
Absolutely. You know, she's playing the queen of the elves, and we're always sort of conditioned to just pay a little bit more attention to queens.
And to pay a little bit more attention to Cate Blanchett.
Totally. That's the purpose of this podcast.
Yeah.
So why do you think, so let's go back to the movies themselves. Why do you think they were so popular? And sort of their popularity has endured, even though it's been almost 20 years since they came out.
You know, I have a theory about this. And this is something that I didn't think coming into this podcast when I proposed it, but I have been thinking about this quite a bit. And I have a theory about blockbuster cinema, and that it kind of peaked around this time, between like 99 and 2006 or so. Some of it might be nostalgia, because I was, you know, the right age at the right time to be getting into these movies. But I do think that at some point, at this late 90s, early 2000s, we had all this new technology from the 90s, the computer effects, visual effects, they have like jumped so much in those years. But we weren't totally sure of how these movies were going to work and how these franchises were going to work. We didn't know that the future of the movies was going to be superhero movies and franchises yet. So this was the period where the studios kind of had to rely on these, you know, these nerds that were the directors who were into these genres to make the movies and see if they worked. And so Peter Jackson comes along saying, hey, I love The Lord of the Rings, high fantasy. There hadn't really been a movie like this in this genre, in fantasy adventure, that had been popular for the last 10 years or so. So they kind of took a gamble, and the studio didn't know what they were doing. So, because they thought, you know, there had been no good fantasy movies. They had nothing to compare it to. So Peter Jackson got to do whatever he wanted, and he got to do something that really spoke to him and something that felt really personal and that was really spectacular. He got to spend a lot of money on it. And I think that is something that was really present then. I feel like that's also present in some other movies, like maybe they're not quite as good as Lord of the Rings, but like The Matrix and the Star Wars prequels, I feel like they also have these auteurs kind of that get to do whatever they want with this money. And that got a little bit lost as they became more successful, and now we have, very by committee Marvel movie making,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Peter Jackson was a very talented director, but when he was given this opportunity, he had only made Heavenly Creatures, and it's a great movie and introduced the world to Kate Winslet and gave us that career. But it also was a very small, intimate sort of story about two young women in 1960s England. So it did not actually tell us that he could do this, but obviously somebody believed he could do it. And this was a gamble, not that we want to give corporations credit for anything, but it was sort of a gamble to actually spend all this money and invest in 3 movies, because it was always going to be a trilogy. It wasn't like they made one and it was successful and they made the other 2. It was always going to be a trilogy.
It's absolutely crazy. I still can't believe that some business people decided to do this. This should have not worked. This should have been a terrible deal. Like, they, to just get this guy who had not made a movie like this before and give him so much money to make 3 movies at the same time. It's crazy. Yeah. That's never going to happen again.
Yeah. One of the things that I liked about this film, watching it again, is that it's very earnest. And usually earnestness is something that turns me off of movies, but this one is earnest done well in a way that we follow Frodo and his friends. And it's sort of like the scene where they become the Fellowship, where he's like, I'm going to go and do it. And then everybody from Aragon to Legolas, and they all come, you will have my sword, you will have my bow, and you will have my axe. And they all kind of come together, and we're going to be, this unit, this Fellowship. And it's a very earnest scene. And it's like in any other story or with any other director, I think, and also the actors are all very good in that scene. It could have been something cringy, but I found it very moving. It's like, this is about friendship. This is about people coming together to do something that is dangerous, but they know they will grow from.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think it's no coincidence that so many people have talked about, including yourself, I think you tweeted about it, it's about the homoeroticism in some of these relationships between the male characters. And my wife was also talking about that when we were watching the later movies between Aragorn and Legolas, and you were talking about Aragorn and Sean Bean's character. Boromir, yeah. And I think it's because of this earnestness of all these male characters being allowed to be very sentimental and very loving to each other. I'm not sure why. Maybe because they're all warriors, so there's like no gay panic or whatever that you would get in some other movies, but they're just very tender to each other, and it's very, very emotional, and it really works for me. Everything between Frodo and Sam always makes me feel very emotional. I choke up a lot of the times when they're talking about how much they like each other and how they're in this together, and
Yeah, and there's also the way Sam and Frodo look at each other with like these loving eyes. It's
love
very
each other
cute.
so much. Everybody looks at each other so much in these movies. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is very fun to watch. And my theory, my thing about the homoeroticism between Aragon and Boromir is that if you look at the Fellowship of the Ring in that movie, their relationship follows the sort of romantic comedy beats. They meet each other, they kind of hate each other, and there is like adversity immediately, like, I hate you, I can't stand you, and it's because of some misunderstanding in their past history, and they're like, can't stand you, you're the worst person, I can't believe I'm supposed to be in the same room with you, in the same quest with you, you are the person I don't want to be with. And then as the story develops, they find out that maybe that was just a misunderstanding, and they misunderstood the history of this other wonderful person. And then by the end of it, it's the romantic comedy thing. It is a death scene. Boromir dies, as Sean Bean dies in most of his parts, but it's also when they confess their love, or in this case, respect for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Yeah, definitely. And on his deathbed, it's kind of like, I forgive you. Now we'll be together in the next life or something like that. It's yeah, totally.
So, Peter Jackson, if you're listening to this podcast, which I doubt, maybe you can do a 15-minute cut of all the scenes between Sean Bean and Viggo Mortensen so we can get the romantic comedy you promised us with this movie.
Yeah, I would watch that.
I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king.
What I really loved about the big adventure sort of battle scenes, and they're just so exciting to watch. From a filmmaking standpoint, they don't look like anything else. They really push the limit with the adventure and with the battle scenes to make them so exciting. Because now we have seen so many, and they all kind of look the same. Like even a superhero movie like The Spider-Verse, which I really loved, and that was an animation. They even gave us the same end battle, which is in all of these movies. But in The Lord of the Rings, they're different. And what I loved about The Fellowship of the Ring was the scale of these battles. They were on a smaller scale. And there was a lot of hand-to-hand combat where you felt the stakes were really high, like the scene where Gandalf falls, for instance. That was a scene where the stakes were really high, that somebody could die. And it's just these few people, 7 or 8 of them, and fighting these huge monsters. I love it's not small scale exactly, but I think it's small scale in the way it's said, but the stakes are so high.
Yes, I have a lot to say about this, actually. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think paired up with this thing of like grand scale, small scale, I think is that the action beats are so very well defined. It's a huge battle, but like every action beat, we know what's happening, we know what they got to do, they do something cool, but it's very specific and it's very clear what they're doing. And the other thing, to compare it with what you were saying about these newer movies, that I think this trilogy really benefits from is New Zealand, and the fact that they have all these huge New Zealand landscapes that like it feels like it's a real world, and you are like, this is not, this world exists. I can see the mountains over there, I can see the rivers, and it feels huge. So when the battle comes, that this is not like people like to say, a warehouse in Atlanta where the Marvel movies are filmed, right? This is not created with CGI environments. You've seen the world, so you feel like this is real, this is happening, this is, and I think it's a huge difference.
Yeah, it does make a huge difference, and it's very exciting to watch this movie. It is long, and for somebody who loves movies, I'm also averse to long movies, but this felt like it wasn't that long, even though it does take its time. It's very languid in its rhythm, but they take the time to spend like 15 minutes at the beginning introducing us to Frodo and the Shire where he lives, and his relationship to Bilbo Baggins and to Gandalf. And that sort of establishes the friendship between these people. And also, you're watching Ian McKellen. So I'm not going to complain about that. He's a charismatic actor. He's wonderful as Gandalf. He's larger than life, especially when he's in the same frame with Bilbo and Frodo. So it's exciting. I think the combination of just how good these people are, the earnestness of it, the way it's filmed, New Zealand, which looks gorgeous everywhere they go, and these actors that they chose, it's so well cast.
Ian McKellen, for sure, I think brings that same kind of magic touch or attitude that we're talking about with Cate Blanchett. I feel like they're both kind of tuned into that kind of like high Shakespearean, but also like a little bit fun, a little bit winking sort of thing that I think makes their performances really stand out.
Yeah, he's wonderful in this movie. And I remember I was very disappointed that he didn't win the Oscar, because he's the only actor ever nominated from these movies for an Oscar, and it was for the first movie. And I was rooting for him at the Oscars that year, and Jim Broadbent won, who for Iris, which is, it's a good performance when you look back at it, but it's also a very unmemorable performance. Like, how many people today watch Iris? No one.
I've never seen it.
Exactly. But I think he won because he was in Moulin Rouge, and he was in Bridget Jones's Diary and Iris. So he had a lot of movies that were successful that year in the Oscar conversation. I think if you wanted to be nominated for Best Actress, you had to have Jim Broadbent in your movie. Because he was with Judi Dench, Nicole Kidman, and Renee Zellweger in three of the 5 Best Actress movies. And so he won over Ian McKellen. But I think Ian McKellen gave us an iconic performance as Gandalf. And this is sometimes where awards are kind of silly, because Gandalf is a performance and a character, and that will be remembered as long as people watch movies, and they will continue to watch these movies.
You don't have to tell me about this. We both are awards people, Oscar people. The Lord of the Rings movies are the movies that radicalized me, that got me into thinking about all these awards. I would love the movies, and I was rooting for them when I was a kid. I hadn't seen most of the other nominees back in 2001. I was just scared about Lord of the Rings. Is Lord of the Rings going to win? Is it not? And then there was the second movie, and then by the third movie, when they swept the Oscars and won an award after another, that was like I was entering Nirvana back then. I was like, yes, finally, it's recognized.
They did the third movie, The Return of the King, which Cate and Galadriel come back for that movie. She has a very nice scene in that one too. That's the one that won all the Oscars. My favorite of all the movies is The Fellowship of the Ring, because I love the setup of the story. I love the way that introduces us to all the characters. I love the beginning of these friendships between the characters. The Return of the King, I think, is marred a little bit by the fact that it had 19,000 endings. Yeah. Watching them all again this week, I definitely agree. Fellowship of the Ring is the best one. It's my favorite as well. Return of the King, the endings, seeing the movies in such close proximity makes it so that the endings feel a little less jarring, that there's so many, because you've spent so much time in such, with this, so that it kind of feels like it's earned. Like you're like, yes, of course, we need more ending because we've spent this time with the people. Totally agree. You don't want to say goodbye to your friends, right? Let's go back to spend more time with Frodo and Gandalf, and let's visit Galadriel.
Yeah, exactly. Both the second and third movie, in my opinion, get a little bit, there's a moment where you're a little bit like, oh, okay, we're still going. And then it, of course, captures you again with all the action and whatever. But those are the ones that I really feel the length more so than the first one.
The first one is tight.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will take a short break, and then we will be back to talk more about Lord of the Rings, about Cate Blanchett, and about her friendship with Ian McKellen. So, Conrado, in this short break, tell us about your show, Wormholes. What's it about, and where can people find it?
Yes, so Wormholes is a 10-part web series that I made over the summer, and it's a science fiction comedy. Basically, it's the story of 2 roommates. One is named Salman, he's a starving poet, and then Bayleaf is the other roommate. She's an influencer, and she's played by my lovely wife, Sachta, who does a great job in this show. And the thing is that there are these 2 roommates who have a wormhole in their apartment. So they have in their closet, there's an interdimensional wormhole that brings all kinds of wacky, otherworldly things into their world. And every episode they have to deal with something new that happens to them, and they learn some lessons, sometimes poignant, always entertaining.
Gwyneth, you goopy bitch! Living for those vagina eggs, queen.
Bayleaf, it's your turn to take out the trash.
This trash emanates a foul odor. It betrays my senses.
Oh my god, Salman, I'm going live right now. My baby's needing
Well, this garbage isn't going to take itself down 5 flights.
Just throw it into the trans-dimensional wormhole that dwells behind the doors of our hallway closet.
Oh yeah, I guess I could throw it into the trans-dimensional wormhole that dwells behind the doors of our hallway closet. Great idea. That thing is so convenient.
The name of the show is Wormholes, and it stars Gamal El Sawa, my lovely wife Sachta Wade, and also myself, Conrado Falco III, as Gaspacho the Super.
Where can they find this show, Conrado?
Yeah, so you can find it on Instagram at wormholes.tv if you use Instagram TV, or if not, you can go on YouTube and search for Wormholes on the Show Docs NYC YouTube page.
Thank you, Conrado, for telling us about your show. So one of the things that people who are into the Lord of the Rings and who love these movies. I'm a casual fan, so I have to admit I haven't dug deep into the lore. I do understand why people love them so much and feel like they need to dig a little bit deep into the lore, because like we talked, the characters are very well drawn. The friendships between them are beautiful. It's an adventure story. And then the thing is, Tolkien created a complete world out of nothing. And world building is not an easy thing. And, Christopher Nolan tries to do it in every movie and almost never succeeds. But he succeeded in building this world with its own rules, with its own different species of hobbits and dwarves and elves and languages. And the world was so attractive to people that people always want to dig deeper into it. One of the things that I think people like to talk about is the metaphor of the ring. What is this ring that rules them all? What is this sort of thing that has this power over people that, it's so beautiful and irresistible, yet it wreaks havoc on your life? So do you have any theories, Conrado?
I'm not totally sure if it stands for one specific thing, but it's worth remembering that he was kind of writing all this stuff around the time of World War II. So definitely a dark period in European history. So, and, the ring is supposed to give you all this power and make you the most powerful person. And throughout the movies and the books, we see all these people who are already powerful. The scene with Cate Blanchett with Galadriel is a great example. Be tempted to have more power. And, she's already the queen of the elves. She lives in this beautiful palace and she has all these elven,
she has a ring. She has one of the original rings.
Yes, she has her own ring. But this particular ring is so powerful, apparently, that everybody gets tempted by it, Do you have any theories about this?
I mean, I think it's like a MacGuffin, right? Like a good movie has to have a good MacGuffin that everybody can have an explanation for. Everybody can see them in whatever it is that they're going through at that time. They have to get that recognizable thing. And I think this is the brilliance of this ring. It can be to what you were talking about, at the time that he wrote it, something like, this was the Second World War. There was a lot of evil in the world. So it could be a metaphor. It could be about that. Or, I was watching this with my husband and he's like, so the ring is drugs, which is like a sort of more basic thing because drugs have allure. They can be very exciting. They could be something that really takes you in and then destroys you, which is what the ring does. So it could be whatever it is that you see it as. It could be something historical, big, huge, or it could be something small that also can wreak havoc on people's lives.
It is a really great device, like you're saying, because it's not just a thing, but it's a thing, the MacGuffin. Like, it's not just something that they need to get or they need to get rid of, but it's something that has an effect on the characters, which I think really brings a next level kind of thing. The scene with Cate Blanchett is a scene that I have thought about a lot, and I remembered watching the movie this last time, how it affected me when I was a kid. The idea of these characters in this movie who are supposed to be the good guys, or like she's the queen of the elves who are supposed to be the pure, most righteous people in Middle Earth, and also Bilbo and also Gandalf and all these people who are tempted by the ring, and all of a sudden they kind of turn evil, or they feel like
all shall fear me and despair. Is that what she says? Is that the quote?
I think she says something like, all shall love me and despair, I think is what she said, which is even better.
Yeah, all shall love me and despair. It's a great one. It's a really good.
Yeah, it's an incredible. It's like a drag queen entering Drag Race. It's like when they come into the workroom, she'd say something like that. But as a kid, this really disturbed me because I was like, these are supposed to be the good people, and now they're like telling me that they want to be bad and take the ring. Like, the weakness of these characters, their flaws, really brought something new to me that I hadn't experienced. I was pretty young, so
Yeah. So, I mean, this is the main scene in the Fellowship of the Ring in which Cate Blanchett appears. So let's set it up. She, the Fellowship goes to Elfland. It has a name, but I'm sorry, I don't know it. I can't even pronounce it. I am looking at the Wikipedia page right now, and I don't think I can pronounce it. So for any LOTR big fans out there, I apologize. But basically, they go to her kingdom, her place, and she welcomes them. And then at after they all go to rest, she comes gliding down in her full ethereal regalia to talk to Frodo and show him her mirror, which is kind of like, it's the mirror that all queens have, right? Like, it's in all the stories about queens, you know. Snow White's queen had a mirror. It's something that we are used to seeing. It's not like, why does she have a mirror? But this mirror is actually more of a big bowl with water. Like, I thought it wasn't a mirror, really. But anyway, he can still look into it. And she invites him to look into her mirror, and he looks into it and he sees the future. He sees the good of, like, he's going to spend time with Sam, and he sees the bad, you know, he's going to lose some friends and things are going to get tough. And then that's when he sort of like shows her his ring. And then what happens, Conrado? Does he show her his ring, or how does she get the ring in that scene?
She shows you're right, she shows the water, Frodo looks into it, and then she talks about the ring and how powerful it is, and how Frodo is in this quest, and how she could use it to bring power. And then Frodo kind of offers the ring to her, I feel like, right? Mm-hmm. And she says like, oh, so you're offering it to me. And that's when she goes into this kind of like trance reverie of like all the things that she would do if she had the ring, and she starts to become evil. And then this is my favorite, is that she snaps out of it and she's like, okay, I passed the test.
Yes, it's very, you know, she does the big thing of like, you know, and then the effects come in, and it's like a scary version of the elfish queen who's all gray and black. And then she says the big line, which we will insert right here.
In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous as the sea! Stronger than the foundations of the earth! All shall love me and despair!
A very memorable moment, because they all, like, you know, Aragon does it and he passes too eventually, but this is the one that's the most memorable, and it's the one that I have seen just shared throughout the years as the scene from this first movie, because it is the scene that encapsulates what the ring is about, the allure of its power, and how it can turn somebody even as lovely as Galadriel into this evil creature.
It's a big transformation, and it's a scary one, because you had sensed from before that she is powerful and that she has so much kind of magic to herself already, that if it's used for bad, what could happen? You know, like the stakes are pretty high.
Yeah, the stakes are very high. If even Galadriel cannot resist this ring, who else will have the power to resist it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What? There's no hope for the rest of us. It's over.
Yes.
I love the way that we lead into the scene. You talked a little bit about this, about how I think Frodo's like about to go to sleep or something, and then she kind of like appears and starts walking, and Cate Blanchett brings this whole like, oh, I didn't see you there. Are you gonna follow me or what? You know, like, and then she keeps going down, and she just brings such attitude to this, you know, to talk like the kids do nowadays. She didn't have to go that hard for us, but she did.
She did. She absolutely did. I will say something about Frodo. As I was watching this time, I was like, Frodo is kind of a damsel in distress. Like, he's always not sure of what's happening. He always needs to be saved by Aragon, even by Arwen. He is sort of the classic damsel in distress. But it's because maybe he's a guy. People don't see that. And I know, like, damsel in distress is a trope that people don't like in movies. That's why we now have things like Captain Marvel and all of that. But it was a trope that was in most adventure movies until around the time of the Lord of the Rings. And I think it's very sort of smart to inverse that and make the lead of your movie a damsel in distress, but such a righteous, wonderful damsel in distress with all these convictions about he's going to go get it done.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think that's also I guess it is a testament to Elijah Wood's performance, that I feel like on paper this character would be very boring, wouldn't work, you know, like he doesn't really do anything, he is only getting in trouble all the time. And I think he does a really great job of keeping us invested in Frodo.
Yeah, he does. He's wonderful in it. He was not very well known when this movie came out, and this movie was such a hit. And I think, like, one of the reasons I think why he wasn't able to parlay this huge success into a career full of varied and different performances is that he's just so associated in people's minds with this movie, with this performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happens, right? Like, it's kind of like a Mark Hamill with Star Wars, or like Harry Potter guy, Daniel Radcliffe, also kind of.
Yes. But, this movie also capulated, Cate and Viggo and Orlando to these wonderful careers because the movies were so successful. Their names became reason for financiers to finance their movies. So I think if you look at those people's pre-2001 and after 2000 and after 2004, you will see like the difference in the sort of movies they made. I think it's a little bit less for Cate because she was already an Oscar nominee, already hailed by critics and audiences and people in the industry as one of the best actors of her generation. So I don't think these movies, besides adding to the fact that she probably being in these movies helped her green light other movies, I don't think it changed a lot of the perception about her, but I think it probably helped her just get movies that she was interested in get made.
Mm-hmm. It probably helped her like buy a house or maybe a couple, I would think.
Yeah, I realized how important these movies were when I read about the abdominal movie, Green Book, and how that movie was greenlit because Peter Farrelly managed to get Viggo Mortensen interested in it. And the reason Viggo Mortensen can, with his name, green light a movie is because he was in Lord of the Rings.
Right, absolutely.
So there you have it. You can blame Lord of the Rings for Green Book.
Oh no, this conversation has turned.
So one of the things that I love about this movie is that it started, I think, one of my endearing, as a follower of Cate Blanchett, I love her celebrity friendships. Like, people currently are obsessed with her and Sarah Paulson because they do these interviews together, which people then keep sharing as memes, which is fun and adorable. But also one of her lasting friendships is with Ian McKellen, and they met on The Lord of the Rings. I think one of the videos that I have seen a lot of the times, and you can go find it, is a variety sort of actors on actors. They do these series of actors on actors where two actors sit and talk to each other. And there's one with Cate and Ian McKellen. It was the year of Carol. And so from late 2015, early 2016, something like that. And that is one of my favorite videos of Cate because he sort of tries to say that their friendship was born on, they would smoke after their scenes, and she doesn't want to admit that she smokes. So it's very funny if you go and watch it. And then when she won the BFI Lifetime Achievement Award, which was also around the same time, I think it was in February of 2016, she won that award from the BFI for her career, and it was presented to her by Ian McKellen, and he gave a very wonderful speech which she then responded to. So that also is on YouTube. And so there is that wonderful, endearing friendship between Ian and Cate. It all started here, people.
Yeah, the world is round, people, like she said.
Yes. If you are listening, go on our website, sundayswithcate.com, and find the last episode, which will be the one about Lord of the Rings, you can come to us on Twitter, at Sundays with Cate, and tell us why you love Galadriel. Because as I have been talking to people, almost every guest who comes on this show has said that their first introduction to Cate was Galadriel. It could be something to do with the age of the people who come on the show. They were just coming into movies around that time. Or it could be because this is such a huge cultural character, a character with a huge cultural impact. So I want to know why people love Galadriel. So tell us. And Conrado, I want to ask you, do you remember the first time you saw Cate, and what was your impression of her? Was it Lord of the Rings?
Yes, I'm sorry to be just one more of the pack, but yeah, definitely the first time that I remember seeing her is Lord of the Rings, and I'm pretty sure it must have been the first time that I saw her for real, just based on the movies that she made before. I don't think she made a lot of like kids movies that I would have seen at the time. So definitely Lord of the Rings was my first impression. Definitely a little bit intrigued and a little bit perturbed because of reasons we've talked about with this whole Galadriel. Is she good? Is she evil? Kind of thing.
She scared you a little bit, huh?
She did. She really did. And there's something about the movie that really stuck with me was that, like, that part. Like I was saying, every time someone gets tempted by the ring, even like Sean Bean, and the fact that he ends up dying at the end, and this kind of thing of like, these people can be good, but they can also be bad and can be tempted. That really affected me. So that was my first impression of Cate Blanchett.
And what's your favorite Cate Blanchett performance or film?
This might be perhaps a little risky to say in a Cate Blanchett podcast, but for the longest time, I was kind of on the fence about Cate Blanchett, I have to admit.
I'm going to cut this bit. No, I'm just kidding. Go on.
Yes, I've been ejected and vanished. No, but I mean, I was young, and sometimes I was like, I'm not sure. Like, sometimes I love her, and sometimes I'm like, is she doing too much? Is she? I don't get it. And it was also the fact that so many people love Cate Blanchett, and with good reason, that I was a little bit feeling like I don't quite get it, until the movie that really crystallized it for me, and that it's still my favorite Cate Blanchett performance, is Carol. When I saw that movie and the character, I thought that's just the perfect match from actor and character, because Carol, a little bit like Galadriel, brings this kind of performativity and theatricality to herself that I think Cate Blanchett is so good at doing. And the thing that you can, and because she's a great actress, you can see that she's putting up this quote-unquote performance as Carol, as the character, and inside she's kind of hurting, and inside she's insecure, but like she presents it so fabulous, you know? And I think that's just an incredible performance. I love it.
Yeah, I love it too. Carol is amazing. And for everybody listening who has been asking me to do Carol, I have big plans for Carol. Just keep listening. We're going to do several episodes about Carol and come at it from different perspectives and different things. We're not going to treat it like any other movie in her filmography.
Yeah.
So now that you love Cate and her acting and her talent, what would you like to see from her in the future, or who would you like to see her work with? Like, she is going to work with James Gray. She already finished doing the new Guillermo del Toro movie. What kind of movie, or what, actor or director or genre would you like to see her in?
Yeah, those are good. I love James Gray, so I'm really excited that she's gonna be working with him. And I mean, she has already worked with so many directors that I love. She's worked with Wes Anderson. She's worked with Todd Haynes, obviously, in Carol. What would I like her? Another performance that I really love of Cate Blanchett, and I wish she did more of this, is on the show Documentary Now, when she plays basically like Marina Abramovich parody. Mm-hmm. And she's just so funny, and I think she's a very funny actor, and a lot of the time she doesn't do that much comedy, partially because we don't make that many comedies anymore, but I think she'd be great at that.
And this is also a running theme for all my guests. They always mention that they would like to see her do more comedy, whether it's lighthearted comedy, like we just did an episode on Where Did You Go, Bernadette, and we talked about how maybe she could do more with Kristen Wiig, or and people also love that performance you mentioned as Marina Abramovich, which was really very funny, and one of the best things she did. It was just half an hour. And Cate is known for her mimicry. She played Katharine Hepburn. She played Bob Dylan. So she could do that. But that was just a little bit more touch, because usually when she plays a Katharine Hepburn, she can't comment too much, especially in a movie that's not really about Katharine Hepburn. But as Marina Abramovich, there was sort of an actor's comment on the persona, and that was really wonderful to watch, and it's very funny.
Mm-hmm. I would also love to see someone make almost the opposite of I'm Not There. Like, instead of many people playing Bob Dylan, maybe it can be Cate Blanchett playing many different characters.
Yes. Cate Blanchett as Lauren Bacall, Cate Blanchett as Betty Davis.
Yeah, exactly. Like, give us an actress roundtable in which it's Cate Blanchett playing different actresses talking to each other or something.
Yeah. But I would love it to be if it's, just old Hollywood, give me all the stars from the 40s, because she has that sort of bigger than life persona that sort of fits the actors of that generation and that era.
Absolutely.
So, Conrado, thank you so much for coming on Sundays with Cate. This was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you about Lord of the Rings. And before you go, let our listeners know where they can find you and your work.
So you can find me mostly on Twitter. If you go at Coco Hits NY, you will find my profile, and from there you'll be able to get to my web series Wormholes, which we talked about already. And I also co-host a podcast called the Criterion Project, where we talk about movies in the Criterion channel and Criterion collection. So that's also available, Criterion Project. Murtada, you have to come on the podcast sometime. We would love to have you. We'll find a good movie for us to talk about.
Yeah, I would love to come on your podcast. It's a wonderful podcast. Everybody should check it out. And you can find me on Twitter at me_says, or follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Sundays with Cate. All previous episodes of the podcast, as well as show notes and other articles about Cate, are available at sundayswithcate.com. And until next time, thank you for listening.